If you've switched from sugar to alternative sweeteners thinking you're making a healthier choice, you may want to hear this. A 2022 study published in Cell found that some artificial sweeteners can actually change your gut bacteria in ways that make your blood sugar control worse, not better. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Dr. Hashmi, board-certified nephrologist and board-certified obesity medicine specialist. And today, I'm going to give you the complete truth about alternative sweeteners based on the latest research. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which sweeteners are the safest for your health goals, whether that's managing diabetes, losing weight, or simply optimizing your health. Now, this is going to be part one of 2 videos that I'm going to be doing, and I'll pop in the link for the second video coming up shortly. Now, let's start with a shocking statistic. The average American consumes about 17 teaspoons of added sugar every single day. That's nearly 60 pounds of sugar per year. And with rising rates of diabetes and obesity, millions of people have turned to alternative sweeteners as a solution. But here's the question nobody's really answering clearly. Are these substitutes actually better for you? So here's a quick question for everyone before we continue. What's your go-to sweetener right now? Is it sugar, stevia, Splenda? I'm really curious to know what you're using before you continue the video. All right, today, I'm going to break down everything that you need to know about alternative sweeteners, what they really are, how safe they actually are, their effects on blood sugar and weight loss, and most importantly, how to choose the right one for your specific health needs. I'll share the research that might surprise you, including why some natural sweeteners aren't necessarily healthier and why the sweetener that's best for weight loss might not be the best for your gut health. Let's start with the basics. What are alternative sweeteners? Alternative sweeteners are compounds used to provide sweetness without the calories and blood sugar impact of regular sugar. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all sweeteners are created equal. There are actually 4 main categories, and understanding these differences is really crucial for making the best choice. First, there's the artificial sweeteners. These are synthetic compounds that are intensely sweet. There are things like aspartame, also goes by the name equal. It's about 200 times sweeter than sugar. There's sucralose or Splenda, which is about 600 times sweeter than sugar. Saccharin, which is sweet and low, is 300 times sweeter. And then there's acesulfame potassium, which is 200 times sweeter. The second category is natural non-nutritive sweeteners. Don't let the word natural fool you. These still go through significant processing. First one is stevia. Now, stevia contains steviol glycosides from the stevia plant. Monk fruit contains mongrosides, and both are intensely sweet with virtually no calories. Now, quick check for everyone. Have you tried stevia or monk fruit? What did you notice about the aftertaste? I would love to hear your comments below. Third category is the sugar alcohols or polyols. Now, despite the name, these aren't alcohols in the drinking sense. Erythritol, xylitol, sorbitol, maltitol, they only provide about 0.2 to 2.6 calories per gram versus sugar, which provides 4 calories per gram. And these sugar alcohols, they're only partially absorbed in your small intestine. This is why they have fewer calories, but can also cause digestive issues. Finally, the fourth category is novel sweeteners. These are names like allulose, tagatose. These are rare sugars because they occur naturally, but in very small amounts. Allulose provides about 0.2 to 0.4 calories per gram and is about 70% as sweet as sugar. So now, why do these people use these instead of sugar? Well, lots of different reasons. A major review in Advances in Nutrition from 2019 found that replacing sugar with alternative sweeteners can reduce calorie intake by about 10% of total daily calories. So for someone consuming 2,000 calories a day, that's about 200 calories, potentially leading to almost half a pound. Remember, in the perfect sense, 3,500 calories is about 1 pound. So if nothing else changed, you're looking at about 1,400 calories in 7 days, potentially closer to that half a pound number. But let's go into the second part, which is the safety. Let's address the biggest sort of elephant in the room. Are these sweeteners actually safe? Now, this is where I see the most confusion and fear-mongering online. So let's take a look at exactly what the science says. The FDA, the European Food Safety Authority, the World Health Organization, have all conducted extensive safety evaluations. They've established something called the acceptable daily intake levels, or ADI. Now, this is the amount you can safely consume every day for your entire life without adverse effects. But here's something that might surprise you. These limits are set with 100-fold safety factor. That means the acceptable daily intake, or ADI, is actually 100 times less than the amount that showed no adverse effects in most sensitive test species. So let me make it a little bit simpler. Here's some specific numbers. If you look at aspartame, the acceptable DI or ADI, or acceptable daily intake, is 50 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So a 150-pound person, that's 3,400 milligrams daily. One diet soda is 180 milligrams. So you would need about 19 cans every single day to reach the ADI that is tested for. So here's a myth-busting moment in that if you're worried about cancer from diet soda, the American Cancer Society's 2020 guidelines state there's no clear evidence linking sweeteners to cancer at typical dietary intakes. Now, before you get too excited, keep listening, because we're going to get to what exactly are the concerns behind these sweeteners that you need to know. Now, a couple more examples. If you're looking at sucralose or stevia, the ADI is 5 milligrams per kilogram. And if you start to get to sugar alcohols, there's no formal ADI for erythritol. It goes by the term GRAS, or generally recognized as safe, but consuming more than 50 grams at once is going to give you some pretty nasty digestive issues, diarrhea, bloating, and so forth. Now, here's the important caveat that you want to take away from this section, and this is based on emerging research. So these sweeteners are safe from a toxicology standpoint, but that does not mean they are metabolically inert. In other words, there's a 2023 review in Nutrients that found that different sweeteners can have very distinct effects on gut bacteria, on hormone levels, even on gene expression. So just because something isn't going to poison you, it doesn't mean it's optimal for your health. And there is one critical exception that I want to point out, which is people with phenylketonuria, or PKU. You have to avoid aspartame completely, because PKU is a genetic condition, affects about 1 in 10,000 people, and these folks can't metabolize phenylalanine, which is one of aspartame's breakdown products. All right, let's dive into the impact on blood sugar, insulin, and diabetes risk. This is probably why many of you are watching. Do alternative sweeteners actually help with blood sugar control? Well, the answer is more nuanced than simple yes or no. So the immediate effects. There's a 2020 Cochrane review. It analyzed 29 randomized controlled trials and found that non-nutritive sweeteners don't raise blood sugar or insulin levels when consumed in typical amounts. Now, this makes sense because they're not providing glucose, so there's no immediate blood sugar spike. But like all things, it's not as simple as not raising blood glucose or insulin level. In fact, some other studies show that they do. Now, question for my diabetes community. Have you tested your blood sugars after consuming artificial sweeteners? What did you find? I'd love to know your experience, because some of my patients actually find their blood sugars rise. Others find they drop. So here's where all of this stuff starts to get interesting. Long-term observational studies, they point to a different picture. There's a massive 2023 study from the Nutrinet Santi cohort. They followed over 100,000 people. What they found was that the highest amounts of artificial sweeteners had a 13% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. In fact, each additional 100 milligrams a day had a 3% increased risk of developing diabetes. So now you're hearing some confusion information. And before you panic and throw out all your diet sodas, which personally I wish you would, we do want to talk about a balanced approach. So my job is not to let my personal bias in, but to give you all the data. So understand, observational studies can't prove causation. People who consume lots of artificial sweeteners, they might already be at a higher risk for diabetes. They might be overweight. They might have a family history. So they're using sweeteners because they're already concerned about blood sugar. So it doesn't mean A leads to B. B could lead to A, reverse causation as well. So there's fascinating mechanistic research that suggests these associations might be real. So remember the cell study I mentioned in the very beginning? Researchers gave healthy volunteers packets of sucralose, aspartame, saccharin, or stevia for 2 weeks. They found that saccharin and sucralose, but not aspartame or stevia, changed the gut microbiome. These changes impaired glucose tolerance in some people. The key word here is some, because the response was highly individual. It depended on each person's baseline gut bacteria, gut microbiome. So this is huge. Your gut bacteria might determine whether sweeteners help or hurt your blood sugar. And so if you think about this, what you eat affects your gut microbiome. If you're eating a plant-predominant diet, whole foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, you're going to get healthier gut microbiome. And so if you use some alternative sweeteners, their impact is minimized because of that healthy gut. So my clinical perspective on this always is focus on whole foods and minimize both sugar and alternative sweeteners if you're really trying to get rid of your sweet tooth. Now let's get into weight loss and alternative sweeteners. This is probably the second biggest reason people use alternative sweeteners is weight loss. So what does the research show? There's a 2021 systematic review in the International Journal of Obesity. And what they found was when you replace sugar with low-calorie sweeteners, the participants lost about 2.3 pounds more than control. The key phrase here is when they replaced the sugar. Remember, this is a study. So the benefit only occurs if you're actually substituting sweeteners for calories you would have consumed. But some people find they have more cravings when they take alternative sweeteners, and as a result, they consume more. So in other words, the question that gets asked, and I'm going to ask this question of everybody listening today is, have you ever had a diet soda and thought, I saved calories so I can go have that cookie? Now, be honest in the comments, no judgment. This is a judgment-free zone. So here's what I see in my practice all the time. People drink a diet soda. They think they've saved calories, so they have that extra food, and that's why they end up not losing weight. Then, of course, there's that question of long-term side effects. Some observational studies suggest that there is an association between alternative sweeteners and weight gain over time. But once again, these are observational studies, which means there could be causation, reverse causation, or some confounding variable we're not thinking about. But people who are already overweight, for instance, might be more likely to use these products. So it doesn't mean that they gained weight. It just means that it was one of those things. All right. Now, when you start to look at effects on appetite and craving, let's dive into deeper on something that I touched earlier. Do artificial sweeteners make you crave more sweets? This is a concern I hear from patients all the time. The theory goes like this. By consuming super sweet substances without calories, you might be training your palate to crave increasingly sweet foods. Now, some animal studies support this. Rats given artificial sweeteners often increase their overall food intake and gain weight. But humans, we aren't rats. So our human eating behaviors are far more complex. There's a 2019 study. It compared 16 sweeteners and found interesting differences. Sucralose actually reduced energy intake and eating frequency more than other sweeteners. Aspartame or stevia was interesting because it actually led to people eating more. Now, what's fascinating about this is that when you start to look at these differences, you still have to take into account that the responses may be highly individual. There's a 2022 Cell study, once again, found that 30 to 40% of participants showed changes in their glucose response after consuming sweeteners. So what does this suggest? Your individual gut microbiome plays a huge role in how you respond. Plus, there's also a psychological component. Some people report sweeteners help them break their sugar addiction. Others say it makes their cravings worse. There's a 2021 review that found effects on appetite depend on the specific sweetener, the food matrix it's in, and the individual difference in taste perception and metabolism. So my clinical advice, pay attention to your own response. Look, if diet sodas make you crave more sweets or overeat later, you have to realize this. And that means alternative sweeteners are not right for you. Let's switch to gut health and microbiome. This is a really cutting edge area and one that's fascinating for me. The gut microbiome. As you know, your gut contains trillions of bacteria that play crucial roles in digestion, immunity, even in mental health. And it turns out alternative sweeteners can significantly impact these bacterial communities. A 2024 review in nutrition found that artificial sweeteners aren't metabolic inert as some people thought previously. Saccharin and sucralose, for example, they alter gut bacterial composition in some individuals. They decrease beneficial bacteria like bifidobacterium, and they increase bacteria associated with glucose intolerance. Now, you may say, well, you know what, these changes aren't necessarily bad on a grand scale, but what I would argue is that they're not neutral either. Stevia, on the other hand, has different effects. So when you start to look at stevia, stevia requires bacterial breakdown or bacterial metabolism to break down stevia glycosides. And studies have shown that some negative impacts on glucose tolerance. So there was a 2020 study, it found that stevia might actually have some prebiotic-like effects, or on the other hand, in some other studies, it showed that stevia could potentially worsen the bacterial microbiome diversity. Sugar alcohols, on the other hand, they have their own unique microbiome effects. Xylitol, erythritol can act as prebiotic. They can feed beneficial bacteria, but they also they can cause digestive problems. So for those of you watching, if you've tried the sugar alcohols, did you have digestive issues? And if so, I'd love to hear what kind of products were they that caused you? Because nowadays, sugar alcohols can actually be found in so many different products. The American Gastroenterological Association identifies sugar alcohols as common triggers for bloating, for diarrhea, especially in people who have IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. This happens because unabsorbed sugar alcohols, they get fermented by bacteria in the colon. They produce gas and they draw water into the intestines. So this is why diarrhea, bloating, etc. can occur. And dose matters tremendously. Now, most people can tolerate 20 to 30 grams of erythritol without issues, but sorbitol, it can cause problems at just 10 grams. So a single piece of sugar-free gum is about 1 to 2 grams. A sugar-free candy bar is about 15 to 20 grams. In other words, a sugar-free candy bar could cause digestive issues. Now, keep in mind that if you're thinking about your own health, an altered microbiome has been linked to everything from obesity to depression to autoimmune disease. And although I can't definitively say the sugar-sweetened products, these alternative sweeteners, the microbiome changes that they cause can attribute to these conditions, I do think that trying to minimize their usage is wise. All right, so we've covered so much information in this video. So what are some general takeaways if you're thinking overloaded with all sorts of data? Well, here's what the bottom line is for healthy adults. These are my evidence-based recommendations. First, No alternative sweetener is perfectly safe or completely dangerous. It's all about context and dose. Remember, all FDA-approved sweeteners are safe from a toxicology standpoint when consumed within ADI limits, which are quite generous, but that doesn't mean they don't have metabolic impacts. Second, if you're trying to reduce your calorie intake or manage blood sugars, replacing sugar or alternative sweeteners with whole foods, fruits, vegetables, can be very beneficial. The key word here is replacing, because if you're just adding on more calories and you're hoping to lose weight, well, that's unfortunately not going to happen. Third, individual responses, they vary substantially. What works well for your friend might cause you to have digestive issues or cravings. The only way to know is if you really pay attention to your own body's responses. Fourth, now this is where people get all sorts of anxious and excited, but remember, natural doesn't automatically mean better. Stevia and monk fruit go through extensive processing, and their long-term effects aren't necessarily superior to the artificial sweeteners. In fact, in my opinion, none of them are good compared to fruits. You want something sweet, eat more fruits. My go-to fruit is strawberries. I love strawberries. Fifth, moderation is key. So even though ADI levels are way up here, there is no benefit to consuming large amounts of any sweetener. The healthiest approach is to gradually reduce your overall preference to sweet taste and to add more whole foods like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains. And finally, remember, water is still the best beverage of choice. Alternative sweeteners can be useful tools, but they should be your primary hydration source. So, if you found this video helpful and you're starting to understand sweeteners a little bit better, I would really, really appreciate it if you would give it a thumbs up. You would subscribe to it, share it with your friends. Remember, knowledge is absolutely power when it comes to your health. You want to make sure that you're making more informed choices. It matters. This is part 1 of the video. In the next video, we're going to dive deeply into how sweeteners end up affecting kidney health, chronic kidney disease risk, and other disease risk, and longevity. So I want to thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Remember, practice kindness to others and to yourself, and I'll see you guys next time.